of our fascination with good spirits.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you. And I think Sheila's now very kindly going to read a section of her book.
Okay, I'm going to start at the very beginning. The book is divided into ages, and the first age is necessity. So it all started innocently enough. When people gathered in crowded, dirty urban centers with no sanitation facilities, many of the waterways inevitably ran foul, polluted with human waste and not fit to drink. When people drank tainted water, they often fell ill with diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera. If they drank fermented or distilled liquors, purified in the brewing, distilling process, they felt fine, often a bit better than fine. As a result, alcohol replaced water as the preferred thirst quencher. 17th century ladies and gents knew nothing of bacteria and viruses, or of alcohol's ability to neutralize these organisms. They just knew by experience that alcohol seemed a safer choice in the way of a beverage. With the price of ale in the Tudor era at just 1 penny or less per gallon, it couldn't have been too difficult to substitute alcohol for water. Easy enough to do if you were on land, just run out to the local merchant and grab a cask. But if you were on the high seas, you'd better have lots of supplies laid in. The dawn of the great sea voyages brought with it the discovery of a wealth of fish off the coasts of Newfoundland, and visiting ships from many nations crossed the Atlantic to harvest this plentiful resource. The long journey over from Europe to the New World required enough supplies to last not only for the voyage, but also for the many months the crews would be away from home engaged in the fishery. Easy enough to pack the food supplies, but what to drink? Any water taken on board these long voyages, if they did manage to find a pure source, spoiled very quickly, and not enough rainwater could be captured to service the needs of a thirsty crew. Even several centuries later, on a voyage to Greece, one unhappy traveler described the drinking water on his boat as putrid, thick, and stinking, that often I have held my nose with my hand while I drank it, strained through my pocket handkerchief. And such was the case for water during the long sea voyage to Newfoundland. Beer, on the other hand, did not spoil as quickly, worked just as well as a thirst quencher, and had the added advantage of keeping the men happy and hard-working. Therefore, English fishermen who came to Newfoundland considered beer and ale staples along with their bread, cheese, biscuit, and butter. Large quantities of beer washed down their daily meals and satisfied their thirst. An early reference for a Newfoundland voyage in 1613, entitled "A Note for the Provision of 20 Men," suggested they needed 50 hogsheads of beer for the journey. Although measurements were not standard, one hogshead was equal to about 52.5 ale gallons. So 50 hogsheads would translate to approximately 2,625 gallons, or if you're thinking metric, 9,937 liters. That's a lot of beer for a voyage to Newfoundland. But one has to remember that they were hard-working men, and their supplies had to last for the entire voyage and possibly well into the fishing season before more supplies arrived. Out on the high seas from 1588 to 1650, daily rations in the British Navy included 8 pints of beer per seaman per day. But by the mid-1600s, 1/2 a pint of brandy, or as they called it in those days, aquavitae, often replaced the beer ration. Serving up spirits, such as brandy, became more practical due to the economics of both money and space. Distilled spirits also had the advantage of lasting much longer than wine or beer. As distilled alcohol usage increased, changes in world politics, major conflicts, and expanding trade among the colonies allowed a new player to enter the fray and strut its stuff: rum. The British Navy discovered rum on a voyage to the West Indies in 1655. Vice Admiral William Penn captured Jamaica and took on rum from the islands to refresh his spent supplies of beer and brandy, and thus began the unofficial use of the rum ration. This unofficial use of rum carried on for some time, until in 1687, a Jamaican planter offered to supply the West Indies fleet on a regular basis with local rum. James II, no doubt delighted at the prospect of breaking English dependency on French brandy, showed interest in the use of rum, but wanted to test it first to see what effects it would have on his sailors' health and well-being. Unfortunately, the king's constant battles with Parliament sparked the English Revolution of 1688, and he lost his throne before the results of his little experiment were known. When war with France erupted in 1688, resulting in the loss of imported French brandy, the matter was clinched. Rum ruled. Drinking straight alcohol and trying to run a ship, however, brought many problems. One captain reported of his crew that 1/3 of the ship's company was more or less intoxicated, or at least modified and half stupefied. As you might imagine, it's not easy to work pie-eyed. There we go. That's
Wonderful.
a taste of it.
No, I think it's a fantastic book, and
thank you.
I mean, it reads wonderfully, and is, I mean, full of what I consider very useful information, and I love sort of extra, getting tidbits from it, and the history of alcohol. Are there any sort of particular favourite parts of yours when you sort of read and thought, oh my gosh, I must keep that in the book?
Oh my goodness, I did so much research. I had so much material. I couldn't put half of it in almost. Actually, I've got a website, and I put a lot of the outtakes on the website.
Really?
So if anyone's interested, SheilaRoberts.com, they can go there, and under Bottoms Up, down the bottom, you'll see all sorts of other things. I wanted to put the songs about drinking in, and the population of the province throughout the ages, and I went and recorded all the drinking establishments of the 20th century. Now, in the back of the book, there's drinking establishments from the 16th, there wasn't much here in the 16th, the 17th, 18th, primarily century, and
did you enjoy going around to all those places, the old places which no longer are drinking establishments?
Oh yes, yeah. It was really interesting. A lot of my stuff came from archives and
Right.
old census and directories, city directories and such. And fair enough, a lot of it is based in St. John's because most of the history went on in St. John's, but I did sort of try and make an effort to go outside in the different parts in the province, and most of the history is relative to all of the island. What happened in St. John's happened overall. Labrador was an interesting place to look at the history as well, and I have a little bit on Labrador in there, which is quite fascinating.
No, it is. It's all, history is always sort of infinitely fascinating.
Yeah.
But one of my key questions is, what led you to write about the history of alcohol in the province?
Well, it just seemed like a sensible thing to do, right? I mean, we drink, and we're well known for being drinkers. And I hope that this book shows why that is, how that happened. And it traces it right from the very beginning. What I wanted to put in was how it all stems back to the Romans. I mean, it goes way back to Britain. I mean, the Romans conquered Britain, and they built roads. And of course, they marched on the roads, and it was very tiring, thirsty work. So what did they do? They built taverns. That was the beginning of British drinking culture. And of course, most of us are from the British Isles, and different parts of Europe, I suppose. And it's a similar culture. We imported that culture with us when we came over.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one point you capture very well, is the sort of, and you mentioned reading, is how much people actually drank, and having 8 pints of beer a day. That seems quite a lot. I think I'd find that quite hard work, and I've tried.
Oh.
but do you think I know that the alcohol was slightly weaker beers, so probably about 3% alcohol.
That was called, well, it depended. Now, if you're talking beer, they had 2 types of beer. There was strong beer, which was nice and strong, and there was weak beer, which was created from the second sort of brew of the mash, right?
Okay.
Now, the alcohol, I think, was stronger, from what I understand, especially the rum. It was much stronger.
Oh, you think that was 50 or 60%? I suppose that's why you have Navy strength rum, which is 57%.
Yeah, I think it was stronger than that originally. And then when Prohibition came, that's another thing I discovered writing the book. I actually didn't know that Newfoundland had a prohibition, and we did for 6 years. And that...
and was it adhered to, do you think?
Sorry?
With the Prohibition, did everybody adhere to the letter of the law, or did everybody just carry on anyway?
You'll have to read the book. I mean, everything went on in Prohibition.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's like a... I can't think of an analogy now, but you know, you cut off one source and another one will pop up. And I mean, they were drinking legal medicines, which were a lot of patent medicines were full of alcohol.
Yeah,
in those
I
days.
did see and the pictures you have of those are great to see. It's
yes, yeah.
Medicinal purposes.
Medicinal purposes, yeah. And then the smuggling. Oh, I mean, there was so much that went on in Prohibition. Yeah. I don't know where to even go with that. There's so much history there.
Yeah. No, well, I think there's always been a bit of smuggling going on here. And
yes. Now, I've talked to certain sources. Some sources say, oh, it's not worth their while now. The fines are too heavy. There's no smuggling now. But I have sources in other parts of Newfoundland that say, yep, it's still going on. So I don't.
Really?
I'm not going near that, not touching that.
Yeah, no, I'm probably much safer not to, and know nothing about it.
Yes, I know nothing about it there, yeah.
Which is great. And in your research, I mean, have you made did you make the cocktails or the drinks, or try and replicate some of the drinks?
Well, I don't really talk about cocktails or anything here, I don't think.
So for aquavit, for instance.
Oh, aquavite.
Yes. I would call it aquavit.
Okay, aquavit.
But I think you're correct.
I think that probably the Latin, I don't know, I'm no Latin scholar.
Yeah, it's water of life.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the translation.
Yeah. Aquavit is very, very old. And I mean, that's one of the things they lived on when the colonists first came over to Cupid's and Fairyland. First they ordered beer and ale, because that's what they were used to drinking. But when they discovered the climate was so damp and cold, in those days they believed in a medicinal system which was called the system of humors, which dates back to ancient Greece. And that system sort of dictates that if the climate is damp and cold, you drink alcohol that's hot and fiery, sort of. And, and tobacco is another thing they used to indulge in because it's dry and hot. So they stopped, well, they didn't stop, but they cut down on their beer and started ordering more aquavit, which was sort of an early brandy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they started drinking more of that for medicinal purposes. They thought it was healthier.
Well, I'm sure they're right.
And of course you make it here.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is cool.
Well, thank you. Well, originally, I mean, our aquavit, we got the idea because we heard that there was trace of barley found from the Vikings up in
Lancer
Meadows, the Northern Peninsula. And it's called bare barley, and we wanted to see if we could actually grow that barley here and make an aquavit based on that. But it proved to be slightly trickier than we thought, so we just used normal barley, which we had grown on the west coast. And we wanted to make our first real spirit with barley, which is used to make whiskey, but for our aquavit. And aquavit now gives you a lot of freedom, because traditionally it's any spirit that you can make with any local flavourings or botanicals. So there's no specific laws defining what it should be. So we thought that was great, and we could make what we want, and something that's slightly whiskey-like, but isn't, because we put a range of other flavourings in there, and a little bit of honey, a little bit of savoury, but it's very, very subtle. And we love making aquavit, and it's, and it is the sort of water of life, and it's just meant to be smooth. But a lot of them now tend to be from Northern Europe, and they all have a lot of botanicals, and sort of like fennel and cardamom, and and they do warm you up on the inside, quite a few of them, because we had to try some for professional purposes.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And have you tried a lot of different aquavits?
No, I haven't. I think I've tried it in Europe, but I haven't really tried.
And we do have some in the office, actually, we could have tried along with ours. But I mean, the other thing that's fascinating is that the move from aquavit to rum was actually a political move rather than a taste-based move.
Yeah, there's so much politics, and it all got tangled up with trade and politics and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the history of the province is we would send the salted cod to the Caribbean, and then we'd get rum back in return.
Yes, yeah.
And do you think that's the primary reason why rum's the most popular drink here now?
Oh, for sure. After the American Revolution, I mean, for a while we were trading a lot with the Americans, and then after the American Revolution, where there had been a blockade on trade with the States, we started going down to the West Indies more and trading more directly with them. And I think that's why we started getting, well, we were trading for rum with the States as well, and they were sort of the middleman. But
right.
After the Revolution, we started trading directly saltfish for rum. And the whole history of rum in the Caribbean is fascinating as well, because they used the rum as a work incentive for the slaves. And in certain instances, it was used here as a work incentive for the slaves.
Really? Just
the fishermen, yeah.
Give them a bit,
yeah.
If you get a good haul, you get a bit more rum.
Yeah, that sort of thing. It's just fascinating, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And when I started looking into the slave trade and everything that went with that, and it was, I read one little bit that I found absolutely fascinating, and I'm wondering if it was sort of the origins of screech. Now, I'm really reaching here, so I may be completely wrong, but I thought it was really interesting that they brewed or they distilled a much stronger type of rum to trade with the African slave traders. So they sent over to Africa a very strong rum,
right.
Think screech, right? And this was what the African slave traders preferred. And they bought slaves with this really strong rum. And I don't know, I'm just sort of musing. I wonder, was it similar to screech? Because screech was extremely strong in the old days, right?
I don't know. I mean, practically, the higher the concentrate or the alcohol, the smaller the volume you need.
Yes.
So that could be...
Transportation.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point.
But,
who knows?
Because they could then water it down there and go further. Yeah.
Speculating the whole way, but it's so much of world history and politics is tied up in alcohol. I just scratched the surface.
Yeah, well, you did, but you did it brilliantly. And that's
thank you so much. So, Peter, where are you from? You don't sound like a Newfoundlander.
I'm a proper hardcore bayman.
Could have fooled me by the accent.
Thank you. I've been working on it. Now, I've been here in the Bay for 20 years. My wife, I met in a bar in Prague in the Czech Republic. And we lived there and then in London and had children. And then she said she must come home. And she lives in Clark's Beach and grew up there. And that's where I've been for 20 years and in the province for 25 years.
Wow.
Unfortunately, I can't get a proper sort of Bayman accent, but I can occasionally say giver and a couple of things like that.
That's good enough, yeah.
Well, it is, and they all know I quite like rum, and
rum.
they all quite like rum. So I think we all get along quite well.
Oh yeah, rum, the elixir of life for Newfoundlanders, I think, yeah. So you've got quite a few varieties here. I was quite amazed at the
Well, thank you. Yeah, we've got, the distillery, we've got two kinds. We've got gunpowder and rose rum. And the reason we put gunpowder in, referencing all your history, is that traditionally rum, as you know, was part of the sailor's daily ration, but the officers would often try and water it down and drink to cover up that they'd been drinking it. So they had to prevent mutinies on board, and so they had to proof the rum had not been altered. So they'd do that by sprinkling gunpowder on top, and then they'd light the gunpowder, and if it fizzled and hissed, the rum was at proof. So we always thought that gunpowder was an integral sort of flavour of rum, and we tried to put real gunpowder into the rum, but Health Canada weren't convinced.
I can imagine.
So we did get the real ingredients, and we made it up with a bit of gunpowder, and it was a bit too much bite and sort of saltiness at the beginning, so we put wild roses on the end of the flavour, and then we substituted the saltpetre for Newfoundland sea salt from Bonavista, and the sulphur with kelp, which is a natural source of sulphur, and nice to use a bit of seaweed, and then charred birch for the carbon, and we thought it actually gave it better flavours than the local flavours, so you've got terroir of the province in the bottle.
So you sound like you know a lot about distilling. I mean, did you go to distillery school?
No, I didn't, but I was a professional drinker for a year.
Oh.
And I was sent around the...
Sorry.
That's right. And I was sent around the world for British TV investigating how other cultures drink.
Oh, so you're serious, you were a
I
professional.
really was a professional drinker. So, that obviously gave me all the experience I needed to help set up a distillery. Luckily, Bill Carter, who's the sort of chief distiller, was a chef, had been a chef for 20, 30 years, mainly in Ottawa, and came back and said, Peter, I want to set up a distillery. I said, Bill, that's brilliant. He goes, and make whiskey. And I said, that takes 3 years. Can you make gin? And he said, oh, yeah. So he went off and made some gin, and that was amazing. And so we tested that, and we took it to the UK, tested it there, and everybody said it was great. So Bill and I started thinking, well, perhaps we should do it legally. And suddenly, within a couple of months, we had a federal license to distill, a provincial license to distill, and much to our surprise, we had a distillery. And I think the whole thing's been a bit of a mystery to us.
Wow.
But it's been great fun, and we just try and sort of use local ingredients and make really fun spirits that we like.
I think it's great that you're reviving aquavit and doing different types of rum, and it's a great industry to have in Newfoundland.
Well, thank you. Well, we're delighted to be here, and and we've got our gins as well, and we've got seaweed gin, and a bake apple gin, which are great. And the key thing is that we taste them that we like them, and then if it all doesn't pan out, at least we've got something to keep us going for the forthcoming years.
Very good.
Okay, so I'd just like to thank Sheila for spending some time with us and chatting about Bottoms Up, which is a fantastic book about history of alcohol in the province, and I highly recommend it to everybody. And thank you very much, Ochre 2021, for having both of us here. And next up, we have Reuben Rake.
Stay down here instead. And I stayed up late 2, 3, or 4. Trouble on my mind. When I awoke, I was on the couch. You were saying your goodbyes. I could have had some loving. I could have had some loving. I could have had some loving, but I'm miserable instead. You told me have a good day, if nothing else at all. And I had to hang up on. Oh, I was real mad. I ain't doing what you tell me, so now I'm feeling sad. I could have had a good day. I could have had a good day. I could have had a good day, but instead I'm feeling sad. Tried to cheer me up, but you should have known better. Oh, I had my mind made up. You took me to a restaurant. You tried to pour me wine, and though it's what I wanted, I said, no thanks, I'm fine. I could have had some wine. I could have had some wine. I could have had some wine, but instead I said I'm fine. Choice is just a construct of what you gotta do. And I've had jobs and others, too many now to count, and all of them are hazardous. You tried to use yourself. I could have been somebody, I could have been somebody, I could have been somebody, but instead I was myself. I could have been somebody, I could have been somebody, I could have been somebody, but instead I was myself.
following program is brought to you by Rogers Anyplace TV. Enjoy